Monday, the 27th of January, and I am coming to the end of A Vague Vacation. This is about his journey through France by Joan Marshall Grant and her then husband Charles. She was famous for her books on farm memory, The Winged Pharaoh was one of her most famous. I think it was published 1937. This one is 1946, and it's a travel journey, and she describes her experience. It's my cat. The Bogus Baroness, chapter 30. Is it 36 or 7? I'll write it in a description. The friends we had originally stayed with in Paris gave a farewell party for us. We both had to try to be intelligent, for we were in the role of author and bionomist, and while I discussed the mechanism of far memory, Charles was confronted with the astronomer royal. We stayed to dinner and left after midnight, regretful that we should not see them again until we returned, as we hoped to do in the spring. I wish we weren't going the day after tomorrow, I said wistfully. You're sure it's too late to postpone our departure again? Quite sure, said Charles. You must learn not to keep on changing your mind, and the auto career doesn't run after Wednesday. Dear Patvert, how attentive he is on occasion. While we were driving down the Boulevard Saint-Michel towards the bridge, he nearly took the wheel from Charles and directed the car onto the pavement. She avoided a lamppost and came gently to rest by the curb. Now this was easy for Patvert, for the pavement on the bridge is so wide that the lamppost on the corner appears to be in the middle of the road. But Charles was distressed, for he leapt out of the car and went back to confirm the optical illusion before he could be convinced that it was an error, which the most cautious could have committed. Don't fuss, darling, I said cheerfully. We are not hurt. No one is hurt. But it could not matter less. You did a beautiful job in avoiding the lamppost. If I had been driving, we should have probably wrapped ourselves around it. A little mollified, he got back and switched on the engine. Well, there's nothing wrong with her, he said, reassured by the usual humming. He let in the clutch, but we did not move forward. Instead, there was a sinister grinding, and the car shuddered. Something's broken, said Charles in despair. He got out again and burrowed under the car. I think it's the rod that drives the front wheels, or the steering, or both. I also inspected the damage. One front wheel splayed outwards, giving an effect of a leering cast in the eye. As the car has front-wheel drive, it was obvious even to me that, short of a crane, nothing could move her. Charles, no doubt, through being brought up among horses, has a personal feeling for engines which I consider excessive. I tried to comfort him, but he continued to blame himself, the inadequate lighting, the lack of policemen, and the rain in rapid sequence. Then he fussed round the car as though it was a favourite hunter he had staked on a fence. Improbably, for they are very rare, a taxi drew up beside us. Charles entered into technicalities, which the driver, who tried to reassure him by saying that similar incidents were quite usual at that particular place and that the damage was trivial. A Citroën, what could be easier to repair? It would be another matter entirely if you had driven a foreign car for which spare parts would be difficult to find. He too disappeared under the car and emerged triumphantly. It's but the bar enclouement. If Madame will attempt to move her forward, we together will attend the sound she makes. It produced the same grinding lurch, and he nodded wisely. It is even as I supposed, for this accident once happened to me. Charles became more reconciled. All was not lost. His vision of us being left penniless in France for several months began to lose some of its more poignant highlights. We might even be able to cross the channel before starvation rendered us too weak to drive. You think we can leave her here all night? But of course, what could be more natural? In the morning arrangements can be made. It is obviously Patvert, I said. There may be some little trouble which this accident will disclose, a spare part needed which we couldn't find in England. Think how tiresome it would be had we found ourselves stuck in a ruined village on the way to Calais. There would probably have been no garage, and consider us hitchhiking with all the luggage and the extras we've collected. The picture of himself tramping along a desolate road with 5 suitcases and a bottle under each arm, while I trotted after him with other oddments draped over me, and the baby's commode we were taking back to a friend balanced precariously on my head, was sufficient to restore him to a more hopeful outlook. But we shall probably have to stay several more days. Of course, I said happily. Where shall I take you? Asked the driver. Before Charles could say Hotel Madison, I gave the name of a nightclub in Montparnasse, sufficiently close for us to be able to walk home. We had been there before and had left on a sodden hunch to find a quantity of police about to raid the place. 2 camions were unloading about 30 gendarmes at each end of the street. Others were patrolling slowly past on bicycles. Either they were looking for particularly belligerent gangsters, or else the French raid is more dramatic than its English equivalent. A night in the south would have been annoying, so we had walked firmly to the car, talking loudly in English, and drove slowly through the cordon which opened and allowed us to pass. I hope they will be pleased to see us, I said. It might be awkward if they think we left at such an opportune moment because we had an advance information. You hardly look like a policewoman, remarked Charles. Nor, I hope, do I resemble a flic, but I would only be civil to inquire how they are. For the first time I went there, when you were garlicking again, they accepted my cigarette case as a hostage. As you may remember, I had deliberately left my note case at home. pubL was an excellent form, for we were treated as friends and allowed a table in an alcove instead of having to be deafened by the band. It appeared that the raid had only been routine search for a certain mauvais type called Le Prince, who was wanted on manifold charges. They even provided superior champagne and carefully removed the label so that other clients should not be jealous that we were favored. The waiter had been in a prison camp with several Englishmen in 1940. We French were in despair, he said, for our own radio told us that all was lost, so what else could we believe? One day we were lined up to get our food and I was behind an English officer. The bush sergeant was mocking at him, but he just smiled and made a gesture of wringing a neck in his hand and said, Churchill will do that to Germany, and the sergeant just walked away. It made a great change in our morale. No one could have been so confident unless he had known we should win. He was a Basque, so I asked him whether he played pelota. He was an enthusiast, and by an even longer coincidence knew a boy called Albert, who had been the junior pro at the Real Tennis Club in Pau, where I used to play 20 years ago. He seemed to think that a woman who not only appreciated jeu de paume, but also played it, must be remarkable, even though I explained that it was not surprising, as my father owned one of the few remaining private courts, had won the gold racket in 1914, and missed the amateur championship by a single stroke. We launched into appreciative reminiscence of pelota, and demonstrated some of the finer strokes with an uncut roll for a chistera. I added a slightly exaggerated account of how I had joined in a game of la main nue, a variety of fives against the outside wall of a pub in Foix not long before the war. This so enchanted him that he asked us to visit him at his flat near the opera, where together we would open his last old bottle. When he had to go to look after some new arrivals, I talked to the girl, who combined the duties of a vestiaire and flower seller. She had a small fox terrier, which lived in a basket outside the communal WC, and had a fondness for gaufrettes, of which I supplied sufficient to reduce it to a replete somnolence. She came to sit with us, and I noticed that the ornate young woman who was the chief hostess gave her a contemptuous glance as she swayed provocatively past. "She is the boss here," said the girl nervously. "If she sees me drinking with you, she will make trouble." The hostess passed again and flicked Charles under the chin with her finger as an invitation to dance. So I invited her to sit with us, which surprised her not a little. She launched on what I realized was a well-worn act. She pretended not to know we were English. "My heart here is in Poland," she announced. "I'm Polish, of the very old family." She thumped her chest dramatically. "My country has been betrayed by the people of Churchill. Today is my 21st birthday, and here I sit in this lousy dump while my castle is ruined. Only the Polish know how to hate." "It is a pity to lie," I said mildly, "and even more silly to try to make trouble when there's plenty ahead." She rose to further histrionics. "Polish, no lie, England lie always." Her bosom heaved, her eyes sparkled through the bars of false lashes. "It is so silly to lie," I repeated even more mildly. "Or at least if you must, then choose a more credulous audience." She tried to call my bluff. "Then who am I? I tell you, I am a baroness of old Poland." It would have been absurd to let her get away with it. "In fact," I said slowly and clearly, "you are French of the most ordinary, and were born within 2 miles of this place. It's not your 21st birthday, for you are 29. Suddenly she began to cry, the tears of a horrid child caught out in deceit. She swept from the table, knocking over 2 glasses. The waiter returned. "It is good that you have annoyed this one," he said happily. "Now perhaps she will not make things so hard for us here." The flower girl came back. We shared another bottle with her, and the waiter and the dog had another gaufret. So, the next chapter is 38, Fermé.